It's August 9th, 2012, inside London's Olympic Stadium. Picture this: 8 of the greatest 800m runners on the planet lined up on that track. The gun fires. And what happens over the next 1 minute and 40.91 seconds is something nobody, not the athletes, not the coaches, not the 60,000 people in those stands, fully understood they were watching until it was already over. David Rudisha crosses the line in 1:40.91, a new world record. But here's what separates this race from anything else in the history of middle distance running. 6 of the 8 finalists run personal bests. 6 in a single race. And Nigel Amos, an 18-year-old from Botswana running his first Olympic final, finishes second in 1:41.73, a time that would have been an outright world record as recently as 2008. One race, 8 men. 7 of them run the fastest times of their lives. So here is what I want to get into today. Not just what Rudisha did, but why it happened. Why did the entire field suddenly run times nobody had come close to before? What was it about how this race unfolded that turned the London 800m final into the single fastest collection of performances in the history of the event? I spent a long time going through the splits and the data, and one number kept pulling me back: 49.28. That is the time Rudisha passed through 400 meters, and everything that follows. The world record, the personal bests behind him, the physics of what happened to those 7 other runners flows directly from that split. To understand why 49.28 matters, you need to know where the 800m world record stood before Rudisha. For most of the 1990s and early 2000s, the benchmark was Wilson Kipketer's 1:41.11 set in Cologne in 1997. That mark held for over a decade. Rudisha had already broken it, first going 1:41.09 in Berlin in 2010, then 1:41.01 in Rewrote later that year. By London, he owned the record. And yet coaches and analysts in 2010 were still describing the 1:40 barrier as physiologically implausible. The oxygen demand at that pace, the lactic acid accumulation over 2 laps. The thinking was that the human body hit a wall somewhere around 1:41. Rudisha's coach, Colm O'Connell, an Irish missionary teacher at St. Patrick's High School in Iten, Kenya, had been working with him since he was a teenager. O'Connell's philosophy was built around controlled aggression from the front. Most 800m coaches tell their athletes to run even splits. Go out in around 50 seconds, come home in around 50 seconds. O'Connell taught Rudisha something different. Go out fast enough to hurt the field, but not so fast that you destroy yourself. The goal is to make the pace so uncomfortable that your competitors are already fighting for survival by the bell, and by then your conditioning carries you home. The strangest part of this approach is that it requires an almost impossible combination of physical gifts and self-awareness. You have to know, at 300 meters, exactly how much you have left. What strikes me about the Kenyan middle distance pipeline that produced Rudisha is how much of it traces back to one altitude camp in Iten, sitting at 2,400 meters above sea level. The thin air, the structured training blocks, the culture of communal running. It produces a very specific kind of athlete. One who can sustain threshold pace far longer than competitors, and who can drop a final 200 meters that would be elite for a pure quarter-miler. Rudisha's personal best in the 400, informally, was believed to be somewhere around 44 seconds. Running a 49.28 opening lap, he was not redlining. He was cruising, by the standards of what his body could handle. Here's where the drafting story gets genuinely interesting. In 800m racing, unlike the longer distances, drafting rarely comes up as a significant factor. The speeds are high, but the race is short, and positioning tends to be about tactics rather than aerodynamics. But what Rudisha created in London was something different. By going through 400 meters in 49.28, a pace that would have been competitive for a world-class 400-meter runner just 20 years earlier, he pulled the entire field into a slipstream that physically moved them through the first lap faster than any of them had ever run it before. And here is the counterintuitive part that actually helped them. Most of the runners behind Rudisha passed through 400 meters in times between 49.8 and 50.4 seconds. Those are opening splits they would never have chosen on their own. Under normal championship conditions, an 800m final tends to go out in around 51 to 52 seconds through the bell. The London final was half a second to a full second faster than that. You would expect that kind of pace to blow the field apart, to leave the chasing runners dead in the final straight. Instead, The opposite happened, because Rudisha's pace was relentless but not chaotic, because there was a clear leader setting a clean line through every bend. The runners behind him found a rhythm they could sustain. They were running faster than they ever had. And somehow, they were running it more efficiently. Nigel Amos finished in 1:41.73. Think about that. He was 18 years old. It was his first Olympic final. He had only broken 1:43 for the first time that same season, and he ran 1:41.73. Put yourself in his position at the bell, running the fastest first lap of your life, tucked in behind the greatest 800m runner in history, the crowd in London louder than anything you have ever heard, and somehow find another gear. That is not a performance you can fully explain with training data or altitude camps or biomechanics. Some of what happened to Amos that night was Rudisha simply pulling him somewhere he did not know he could go. Here is the take that will probably get some pushback. The 1:40.91 is the most complete single performance in the history of middle distance running, and it is not particularly close. You can make arguments for Hicham El Guerrouj's mile world record in Rome, or for Kenenisa Bekele's 10,000m in Brussels. But those performances, as extraordinary as they are, came in races specifically built around the record attempt. Pacemakers, controlled fields, optimal conditions. Rudisha's 1:40.91 happened in an Olympic final. Maximum pressure, no pacemakers, a field of the 8 best 800m runners in the world fighting for gold, and he still broke his own record by nearly half a second. What do you think? Does running a world record in a championship final with no pacemakers under maximum competitive pressure make it the greatest single performance in middle distance history? I genuinely want to know where you land on that. 13 years have passed since that night in London. The 1:40.91 still stands. No one has come within a second of it in a global championship setting. Rudisha himself ran 1:43.31 at the Rio Olympics in 2016. Still won gold, still the best in the world, but a full 2 seconds slower than his London peak. The closest anyone has come to the record in a championship race since then is the 1:41.73 Amos ran that same night in London, which means the second fastest championship 800m in history is also from that race. The London final did not just produce a world record, it produced the top 2 championship performances of all time simultaneously. One detail that has stayed with me since I first went through this data: Rudisha's second lap in London was 51.63 seconds. He ran 49.28 for the first lap and 51.63 for the second. That negative split, just over 2 seconds, is actually relatively modest for an 800m world record. It tells you he was not destroying himself to run that first 400. He had more to give. Whether the sub-1:40 barrier will ever fall is a question that seemed outrageous in 2012 and still feels almost science fictional today. But in 2010, coaches were calling sub-1:41 physiologically implausible. And on August 9th of 2012, one man made it look like a training run. If you want to see another story about a performance so far ahead of its era that the sport spent years trying to catch up, the next video is right there. What Rudisha did in London is one of the all-time great stories in sporting history. And the fact that it still stands, untouched, 13 years later, says everything. If this is the kind of track and field storytelling you are here for, subscribe and leave a comment. I read every single one.